Okay, so welcome to part 47 tonight. I'm glad that you joined us. If you're watching online or live online, or you're here in the church building. Let's see. We're going to start with our introduction as we normally do. So we're in part 47, chapter 47. We stayed pretty true to it, trying to stay within, because it's 66 chapters. It's a lot to study. I mean, I could break it down into small increments and it would just take forever. So I don't want to do that. I would love to do it, but there's so much to look into. So, but I think this can give us a really good overview of what we're referring to in this chapter. So this is chapter 47 tonight. So I'll begin with our introduction as we normally do. The amazing thing about this chapter is that it mentions the fall of Babylon long before this small vassal state of Mesopotamia became a powerful world empire. Through this, we realize that God can see and experience the end from the beginnings. We saw that last week in chapter 46. In the end, this great empire of Babylon is pictured tonight as a young slave girl grinding the wheat with a millstone while she is humbly sitting on the ground. The empire of Babylon would eventually be greatly humbled to the dust. This is what we see in metaphor. Babylon would be so humbled that it would be sold off and its people would be marched naked into Persian slavery. This is what's going to happen to them. And it's really what they did to other nations. So what they did to the other nations will be brought to them. And the world is not so merciful, is it, when it comes to these things? So in verse 1, the great ancient Babylon would be reduced to a slave girl piteously sitting in the dust of destruction. This is the visual that you received tonight, one of the visuals. So this is verse 1. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne. O daughter of the Chaldeans. That's being specific, isn't it? For thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. So here Isaiah predicted the fall of Babylon more than 100 years, even before it started to be an empire in 605 BC. So very likely this prophecy was done. It could have been done as late or as early as 715 BC, maybe even before that. But a long time, even if it was done in 700 BC, it's still a long time before the 539. We're going to talk about that. We'll get to that date in just a bit. Oh, well, in fact, that's in what I'm going to be talking about now. So at the time of this writing, okay, so what was Babylon at the time of this writing, when Isaiah was writing it? Because there was a Babylon, there was a Chaldea, okay, at that time. But it was a small vassal state under the great shadow of the powerful Assyrian Empire. It had not yet emerged as the mightiest force on earth, but it soon would be. Babylon would be the proud and evil empire that would besiege and destroy both Judah and Jerusalem. But one day, the Babylonians, who would be Judah's captors, would become themselves captives and slaves. This would happen at around 539 BC, just 66 years after they began. Very short time for this empire. 66 years. Imagine that. By this, we understand that God, not Babylon, is the one who possesses the ultimate power. God had used Babylon to punish his sinful people, Israel. It was God who would use the Medo-Persians to destroy Babylon, and it would be Cyrus, the king of Persia, who would free God's people, Israel. So this is what would go on. But this is the humility and the humiliation of Babylon. Okay, this is the subject that we're looking at tonight in the whole chapter. So in verses 2 through 7, the proud kingdom, there's only 15 verses in this chapter. The proud kingdom of Babylon, would be greatly humbled and shamed by being stripped naked. So it's pretty blatant here. I mean, as far as the description. So here we go. Take the millstones and grind meal. Uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers. In other words, leave. Thine nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. It's very interesting. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. And those are two names right there, the Lord of hosts and the Holy One of Israel, which are Old Testament messianic titles for Christ. Sit thou silent and get thee in darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy. So when he's specific like that, calling them the Chaldeans, there were Chaldeans. They were an ancient people. The ancient Babylonian people were called Chaldeans. And so, here you have it. These Chaldeans are being talked about, but they have no empire at that time. Assyria is the empire at that time. So it's very interesting, once again, why is the Chaldeans being cursed and being called this great empire? Okay, so, all right. Let me just read that again. The Lady of Kingdoms, I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. Thou showest them no mercies. He's talking about when the people were taken in captivity, but had they been taken in captivity yet? No, that's not until 586. Okay. And he already tells the Babylonians that they would not take mercy on his people. Long before it happened. He knew, didn't he? Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. And in other words, the old man, the old lady, the people that are, vulnerable, they're old and they can't do a lot of work, and yet they make them work. And thou said, I shall be a lady forever. This is their boasting. This is Babylon boasting. So that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it. So there's a lot of interesting statements in here, and he's talking to a future people, not to the people actually living at that time, right? So it's really interesting. So God illustrated the humbling of Babylon in ancient terms. Okay. We find in Scripture that King Nebuchadnezzar boasted of his perceived greatness as he stared out and looked at his Babylonian palaces, temples, and hanging gardens. This is found in Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the majesty of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Isaiah is talking to that man right there. Do you see that? But is he talking to that man in real time? No. No, they weren't contemporaries. No, Nebuchadnezzar lived over 100 years after, I would say even after Isaiah went off the scene pretty much. Okay, maybe a little bit less than 100 years, but not less than 75. Okay, so there you have it. So it is true, it was true, the ancient city of Babylon was beautiful and glorious. Her famous hanging gardens were a wonder of the ancient world. Her temples and ziggurats were breathtaking and enormous. They even say that the actual, when found in Genesis chapter 10 was still there. That ziggurat was still there. Yeah, that Tower of Babel you read about in Genesis chapter 10. And there's archaeologists that say that the foundation, I've even watched some of the videos, but they say the foundation, and they show the foundation, it looks like a moat because the water has overflowed it because what's happened is the water table's gone up because there's rivers next to it, you see. And so that's what's happened there. It's very interesting. So these ziggurats were breathtaking and they were enormous. And their palaces were amazing and hard to describe in detail. Today, this once great city, is utterly wiped out, and it lies as a buried ruin. Just a tiny portion has been uncovered by a German archaeologist named Robert Kodaway, who excavated the site at the turn of the 20th century. Today, Mr. Kodaway holds the record for removing the most dirt and sand from a site of any modern archaeologist. He has a record. Nobody has removed more dirt from a site than this man, Robert Kodaway, and he did it at Babylon. Okay, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? So even after Mr. Kodaway's work, most of the great city of Babylon still lies buried under the sands of southern Iraq. The whole area is unlivable, and it is filled with vermin and wild dogs. Not a village today is built within the borders of the ancient city of Babylon. The people of the land of Iraq, they will not even live on that land. They are filled with superstitious fear to even be around the site, especially at night. Kind of spooky, isn't it? Here's an interesting response when questioning AI. I just went on there to see what they would have to say about it, about the superstition surrounding Babylon today. And this is what they say. Yes, there are various stories and superstitions surrounding the site of ancient Babylon today. Some people believe that the ruins are cursed or haunted, stemming from the site's historical significance and the dramatic events that occurred there, including its destruction and fall of empires. Local legends often speak of bad luck or misfortune befalling those who disturb the ancient grounds. Additionally, the site's association with ancient rituals and deities contribute to a sense of unease among some visitors. However, these beliefs vary widely and are often influenced by cultural narratives and personal experiences. And yeah. So it was destroyed, okay? That's what I want you to see. And that's what we have here. Ancient Babylon was likened to a humble, destitute servant girl and also a childless widow. So the humble servant girl sat on the ground to grind meal for her bread. This is the picture. Her head and her thighs are uncovered, which was an ancient sign of humiliation and compromise. God would no longer treat her with dignity, for it was long gone. God gives his promise by his mysterious name, the Lord of hosts, the Holy One of Israel, which are messianic names in the Old Testament. He promised that she would sit and suffer in silence, and never would she be called for again. The Babylonians showed no mercy when they attacked Jerusalem, and they were sold into captivity the destitute people of Judah. The Babylonians boasted that their motherland would be a queen forever. And we now know that that was an empty boast. Very soon, God told them that it would be over for Babylon because she did not consider how all her rebellion and evil would work out for her. According to this chapter of prophecy, it would end for ancient Babylon long before she began as a powerful empire, God told them. And I find that interesting because In the book of Revelation, it talks about Babylon again, written long before the world empire is set up. Did God know about it? How interesting that is. This is what you have here. So this is an interesting study tonight as we look at this. The kingdom of Babylon that exalted itself with pride would be brought into oblivion. This is what we see in verses 8 and 9. Therefore, hear now this, thou art given to pleasures that dwellest carelessly. Sound like our day? Does that sound a little bit like our day? Living for pleasures, dwelling carelessly, that sayest in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. Doesn't that sound like our day? Selfishness, self-deification. Yeah. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection, for the multitude of thy sorceries and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. And once again, if you go, and we don't have time, but if you go to Revelation 18, it talks about these things, and it's very much linked to what you're reading here.
One day.
Yeah, just one day. Just like that. Yeah, just like that. It's over for these people. And so it's so interesting, isn't it, when you look at these verses, and then you can tie it into our day. So in one day, it would be widowhood for Babylon. Childless widowhood was an ancient metaphor for a destroyed and destitute kingdom. That's a metaphor. There, you got two metaphors there. You got the virgin, the young girl that's destitute, and now she's a slave, and she's on the ground, and she's grinding meal with a millstone. And then you got the other picture where you got the woman who's the widow, and she's lost everything. She's lost her husband, she's lost her children, she's lost everything. And this is what you have here. So we find that Babylon, who was known for their enchantments and witchcraft, that they would use them, but nothing would deliver them. In fact, their witchcrafts were a sin against the Lord, and it had perverted their way. Of course, they could stand on their enchantments, but none of their vain attempts would deliver them. They could go ahead and try, but eventually they would be as stubble for a fire, and no one would take pleasure in their fire. It would just burn, and nobody would need the heat because no one would be around to help them. They were finished. They would not be called the Lady of Kingdoms anymore. At this point of the prophecy, it was very unlikely that little Babylon had this title yet. I don't think it did. No. Yet one day they would carry it. It would be given to them. And once again, we can see that God knows the end from the beginning. Therefore, this prophecy revealed that it would end badly for Babylon. God told them all about their future before it even happened. And he does that for us too in the book of Revelation. Therefore, caught up in their pursuit of power and pleasure, Babylon believed in their own greatness by claiming to be the only great power on earth. Babylon had felt completely secure, and Nebuchadnezzar, its king, had exalted himself as a god. But the true God had taught Nebuchadnezzar a powerful lesson by taking everything away from him in Daniel chapter 4, verse 28 through 37. What happened? Well, for 7 years, this man was stricken with madness, and he walked around the fields of Babylon, hairy, naked, and unwashed, and he was a babbling fool, eating grass like an ox. He did that for 7 years. God taught this king an important lesson, and he humbled himself in the end, didn't he? Our society today is addicted to pleasure and power, but these things can quickly vanish from sight. They can. They sure can. We should look at ourselves and ask how we can be more responsible with the talents and possessions that God has given us. How can we use our life for Him in His honor rather than foolishly exalting ourselves? Amen. I think that's a lesson that we need to see from the fall of Babylon. In verse 10 and 11, the empire of Babylon trusted in themselves, and because of this, they were greatly humbled. So let's look at the verses. For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. There it is, deification, self-deification. Therefore shall evil come upon thee. Thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee. Thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. Do you know what that means? It's just like Pompeii. It's the same idea. They woke up one day, they went about their daily business, and all of a sudden, it was over. And we read about it in the book of Daniel, don't we? That it was actually in a night, wasn't it? It just, they were sleeping.
They drained the river.
They drained the river.
And before they even knew what was happening, they were already
And
captured.
And Belshazzar was having a party, and people still use all the time I hear people, the handwriting's on the wall, handwriting's on the wall. Where did they get that from? Well, they get that from the Bible. You tekel upharsin. It says He has measured your life, you are found wanting. And then he says that you will fall to the Persians. Upharsin is just another name for the Persians.
I think it's something being weighed and tried, tested.
And you found wanting. Yeah. You have been weighed in the balance and you have found wanting, and you will be given to the Persians. So God was telling them that, and they were humbled in one night. It's just like that. And there you have the prophet Isaiah, even before Babylon's an empire, even before there was a Nebuchadnezzar, even before there was a Belshazzar. He's telling them their end. He's telling them how it's going to end for them. Right there. There it is. Yes. Self-deification. Yeah, he's God. Yeah, well, he made that golden image in Daniel chapter 2, that was a deification thing. Self-deification, that Babylon was God and you needed to worship Babylon, when God says, no, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. I'm God, not Babylon. And so, no, I will not. He's like, God, I won't share my glory. And you're finished. And God can do that. He can just finish a nation in one night. He can do it. It's not hard for him. Very simple. He knows how to do it. So God confessed that he was angry with his people Israel. So this is the whole reason why the Babylonians were empowered. Therefore, he polluted his inheritance and caused his people to be taken into captivity by the Babylonians. But over the years, the Babylonians mistreated the Jews and brought anger and wrath, and God eventually was against them. He watched as the Babylonians lived in pleasure and suffered on the suffering backs of their Jewish captives. The Babylonians were cruel and they were heartless. They bragged that they would never see any troubles for themselves. But God was looking into the future and seeing all that would happen to them. He was proclaiming the end of Babylon before they even became great Babylon. This, therefore, is an incredible prophecy, and it gives credence to the supernaturality and the verity of the Word of God. Doesn't it? We are early tonight. Boy, I'm liking this. In verse 12 through 15, as we finish the verses, the sorceries of these people would prove to be empty exercises in futility. Stand now with thine enchantments and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth. If so be, thou shalt be able to profit. If so be, thou mayest prevail. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Thus shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander every one to his quarter, and none shall save thee. Pretty dour, isn't it?
Friends,
Yeah.
That's good. And also, I just can't help but wonder, there's just a furnace on standby. I think that's what they used to sacrifice to their god, whatever their god was.
Yeah.
And because it says the stargazers and all of these magicians and whatever, okay, right? And they're normally the ones who are in charge of the mystical arts and the kind of priests, weren't they? And then it talks about them going into the fire, very good.
Well, when the Medo-Persians surrounded the city that night, and Belshazzar, saw the handwriting on the wall, I'm sure what they did was they burned the city. And that's what it's talking about. It's because that's what they would do. If you look in the Bible, whenever a city was destroyed, it was burned. And they beat them with bricks and things like that, but they had wood beams and stuff, and the wood beams, of course, would burn, and everything would fall down. It would be destroyed, be a heap ruin. No, they wanted to destroy it. They didn't want to have it because they would have rebuilt it and made it into Persia, but they didn't do that. They destroyed the city. If you look at the book of Esther, it talks about Shushan. It talks about different places, but it doesn't mention anything about Babylon. It talks about Persia. They wanted their headquarters to be in Persia. Persia was not Babylon. They wanted to destroy it, just like they destroyed. Well, the Babylonians destroyed the Ninevites, Nineveh in 612 BC, and that was not rebuilt. And it was cursed. And by the prophet, and so was Babylon. Babylon was cursed. It was not rebuilt. And it's a huge city. I mean, if you see the excavation site of Babylon, I was watching this video this guy showed, and he shows you how big it was. Yeah, his name is Joel Kramer. If you ever get a chance to look at his videos, there's one on Babylon that is just fantastic. And he'll give you the whole measurement of this city, how big it was. It's huge. And there's not a village built on it. Not today. No village is built within the borders of the walls of Babylon. And you can even see where the walls were. It's pretty amazing when you look at it. And even Nineveh, it was a huge place as well. Both cities were enormous. They were enormous cities, and they were destroyed and not rebuilt. It's pretty amazing. Okay. It's like New York getting destroyed and never being rebuilt, or London being destroyed and not being rebuilt. It's like that. They're huge. They're just huge. And they're buried under the sand. So the people of Babylon, they sought advice to help from astrologers and stargazers. So this was very much in their thing. And it's interesting that even today, a lot of people are looking into these type of things, witchcraft. They're getting involved in astrology. Don't ever get involved in that. Stay away from it. It's demonic, and it's cursed. God doesn't want us to get involved in these type of things. So, like the idols of wood or gold, the astrologers could not even deliver themselves from what was to come by the destructive hand of God. That's what it's saying here. This is they're going to burn, So they're not going to deliver themselves. So why should the people rely on those things which are powerless to deliver? Those who were helpless could not help them. Alternatives to God are empty and are destined to fall and fail. The lesson from this chapter is clear. If we want help, we should find it in God. He is the one who has proven his power in creation and throughout all of human history. Today, ancient Babylon lies in ruins under the sand. Miles and miles of just destruction under the sand. It's amazing. She testified of what will happen to a proud people who have exalted themselves over their creator. The Lord Jesus Christ said in Matthew chapter 21, verse 41 through 44, and we're going to be done early. Wow. Did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore say I unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you and given to a nation. You ever seen that? Nation, bringing forth the fruits thereof. And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken. But on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And I believe that's what you have here in Babylon. The stone fell upon Babylon and ground it to powder, and it's finished.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The stone being carved out of the mountain, but not by human hands,
Right.
and rolling down and smashing its feet and destroying it.
And the stone fell upon the toes. The whole image goes down. Boom. And it becomes chaff. And chaff is what's left over when they would do the winnowing. When you do the harvest of the wheat and you go up to the winnowing floor, to the threshing floor, and you would take it up there, and you would first of all you would stamp the stalks down and remove the kernels from the stalks, okay, and then you'd throw the stalks away, and then you would take all the little kernels which would have husks on them, and they would take them and they called it a winnowing fork, and they would kind of go like that and then throw it up in the air. And when they threw it up in the air, the idea is the chaff would come loose from the it's the shell of the seed. It would come away from the seed and it would blow down the hill because it was a windy place. That's why you'd have a threshing floor on a hill. So they go and throw it up, and then the wind would catch it, and the hard seed would come back down onto the threshing floor, and the chaff would just blow down the hill. It was no good. And usually it was just left there. It was just left there for whatever, for nature. And then sometimes they would gather it if there was a lot of it, and they could use it for the bedding of animals and things like that. But that was the best that they would use chaff for. But chaff was no good. So whenever you see the word chaff there, that's what that is referring to. And that image becomes chaff. And Babylon became chaff. And yeah, it's not rebuilt. And Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild some of it. He's restored some of the areas where it's like the main where the main palace was. They've uncovered that pretty much, but nobody lives there. And they were trying to make it into a city again, but it will not be made. He couldn't rebuild it. No one can rebuild it. It will never be rebuilt. It's cursed. It's a cursed site. And it's a testimony to people who become proud, become independent. They think they can do it. They don't need God. They made their own gods, that type of thing. Does anybody else have any thoughts or anything? Yep.
These merchants, as soon as they see the destruction, they're just gone. They're, it's like acquaintances or supposedly from the youth. So apparently they've been like acquaintances and business relations going for some time, but as soon as there's a problem, they're gone. They just go to their own, they just walk away. And it's so much like the user mentality, we're gonna use somebody, but when somebody has a hard time, we're just gonna walk away, we're not gonna stand by them in their difficulties or anything.
Right.
But
Yeah.
also, you know, how they're distraught over
That's another good point.
their finance.
Merchants are also mentioned in Revelation as well. And I was gonna say, Babylon was a multicultural city. Remember when, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were called before the king to bow down to this image? And it says, now when you hear the sound of the harps, this and this instrument and that instrument and that instrument, those were all instruments from all over the world. And that was what Babylon was. They brought their captured, exiled people from all over the world and so-called best of the world to build and be part of Babylon. So it was this big multicultural thing, but like unified, like a world order, like they're trying to do now, but through man, not through God. And so
I want you to think about that for a minute. Okay, so you asked the question earlier, why wasn't Babylon rebuilt? Okay, why wasn't it rebuilt? It was a huge place. They burned it. They left it for ruin. Why didn't they rebuild it? Anybody? Why? What would possess people to not rebuild a place?
well, like you said, it was cursed. God himself even said it's cursed. Not even jackals. It'll just be jackals and owls that will be living.
Okay, so the prophecy, but let's look in a practical way. Okay, why would people that live around Babylon not want it to be rebuilt? Weren't they
Because they're
affected by it?
scared.
Weren't they affected by it? What was that?
Because they were scared in fear, but
Okay, so
they were
superstitious fear,
in
perhaps?
denial. They're in denial.
Okay, denial, perhaps? Okay, so Brett brought up a good subject. He said that if you hear all these musical instruments, so different parts of the world have different types of musical instruments. Am I right? Okay, so like if you go to like where you're from, they have different musical instruments there. And then you go to people like in Italy, they have different musical instruments. If you go to Africa, they have different musical instruments. Everybody has these different musical instruments. So that would tell you that there were different types of people there, like you were saying, you were suggesting. And that's true. Because what the Babylonians did was they took over the world and they enriched themselves on the backs of the world by being cruel. So somebody's been cruel to you. Are you going to want them to be blessed? I mean, on a natural scale, I mean, naturally speaking, no, people are going to want revenge, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the place that caused them so much trouble, the world that caused them so much trouble, was a symbol of all the trouble that they were caused. You know, whatever they were taken into captivity, all these people, whenever Babylon came or the Assyrians came and they took people into captivity, they would march them off naked and humiliated, right?
each other because they have.
Right.
So yeah, I get that.
So they were cruel, and so because of their cruelty, when the Persians came in and they surrounded them and took the city, they took these people captive, and they wanted vengeance on these people because of all that they had done. So they said, "You're not rebuilding that. It's going to remain a testimony to a cursed people." And the same thing happened to the Assyrians over Nineveh.
Do you know another thing? So you had the original Tower of Babel, right? And why did that stop being built? Because they all wanted to come together. And what was happening again with Babylon? There they were again, trying to do it again, trying to build this world empire again.
Right.
And that's what's going to happen at the end of the world as well. They're going to come together.
And they're going to build it on cruelty. So the Assyrians, okay, you see, the Babylonians didn't learn the lesson. They didn't learn the lesson because they were the ones that destroyed Nineveh. The Babylonians destroyed Nineveh with their allies in 612 BC. Then they became an empire in 605 at the Battle of Carchemish, when the Babylons and the Assyrians and the Egyptians fought against the Babylonians. That's the Battle of Carchemish. And then after that, the Assyrians were ended and the Babylonians became the world empire, but they never learned. So then they became the cruel ones. That they hated the Assyrians for their cruelty, but they themselves became the cruel ones. They didn't learn. And then what happened to them? They themselves were destroyed, and it was by God's hand, using the Persians on that night when he wrote on the wall, "You are found weighed in the balance, and you are wanting, and your kingdom will fall to the Persians." So it's an interesting thing. There's two lessons that we learn from history. Okay? You know what the two lessons that we learn from history are? Okay, that's the first lesson. We never learn from history. Okay? And the second lesson is history ends up repeating himself because of the first one. Because we never learn, so we repeat it. And that's what you see here. You see a repetition of history, and then you have two huge ancient cities that are lying in ruins today. And I'm telling you, Babylon, you need to watch some of these videos, but Babylon is in ruins. Okay, it is absolutely in ruins. So thank you for listening tonight. I hope that gave you some food for thought. We finished a little early so we could talk about a few other things, and I hope that as you were listening in, you received that as well, and you could hear that, because it was interesting as we talked about these things as we closed. So thank you for joining us. And then all those online, just stay on, please.